I've been a park ranger at Yellowstone for 8 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It started like any other shift. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and I was making my rounds near a restricted section of the park, a place even seasoned rangers avoid after dark. There's a reason it's off limits, but most people think it's just due to wildlife dangers. The truth is, even we don't really know why, but the locals have plenty of stories. About halfway through my patrol, I saw something odd. Massive footprints pressed into the dirt, each easily twice the size of my boot. My first thought was a grizzly, but these weren't bear tracks. The prints had toes, 5 of them, human-like, but far too big. My gut clenched, but curiosity got the better of me. I radioed in, but the signal was weak, typical. These woods are notorious for dead zones. I followed the tracks deeper into the restricted area. As I moved, the forest around me grew unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of my boots crunching on leaves. Every instinct told me to turn back, but something was pulling me forward. Maybe it was that old ranger instinct to protect. Maybe it was stupidity. After about an hour, I found something else. A shredded deer carcass, torn apart like it was nothing. I've seen wolves take down prey before, but this was different. The body wasn't eaten, just left there, mangled. And the size of the wounds, huge gashes, looked like they were made by something far bigger than any predator I'd ever seen. That's when I heard it, a low guttural growl that vibrated in my chest. I froze, my hand reaching instinctively for my radio. The static told me I was still in a dead zone, cut off from any help. The growl came again, closer this time. I turned slowly, scanning the dense trees. Something was watching me. I could feel its eyes. Then I saw it, just a glimpse, but enough to send my heart into overdrive. A hulking shadow moved between the trees, far too tall to be a person, far too large to be any known animal. It moved with a strange, deliberate grace, like it wasn't just wandering, it was stalking. Bigfoot, I whispered under my breath, barely believing my own words. I didn't stick around to confirm my suspicion. My instincts kicked in, and I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my life. But I could hear it behind me, heavy footfalls crashing through the forest, the sound of branches snapping like twigs. I knew it was faster. I could feel it closing the distance. I veered off the trail, hoping to lose it in the thick underbrush. My legs were screaming, my lungs burning, but I didn't dare stop. The only thing running through my mind was survival. I kept telling myself, "Don't look back, don't look back." But I did. In a split second, I caught a full glimpse of it, towering over 9 feet tall, covered in matted dark fur. Its eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and its face, somewhere between human and beast, was twisted in a snarl. It wasn't just chasing me, it was hunting me. I stumbled, barely catching myself before hitting the ground. But that brief hesitation was enough. I felt a sharp tug at my pack, yanking me backward. I fell hard, my head smacking against a rock. The world spun, and I could hear the creature approaching, slow now, like it knew the hunt was over. Desperation fueled my next move. I grabbed a flare from my pack and ignited it, the bright red light hissing to life in my trembling hand. The creature stopped, its glowing eyes narrowing. For a moment, we were locked in a standoff. Then, with a low growl, it backed away, disappearing into the trees as silently as it had come. I didn't wait to see if it would return. Stumbling to my feet, I made my way back to the trail and didn't stop running until I was back at my truck. I locked the doors, hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. The footprints, the carcass, the thing in the woods. I reported it all, but my superiors dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Said I'd been working too many night shifts, but I know what I saw. And I'm never setting foot in that part of the park again, because whatever it was, it let me go this time. They told me about the mist when I first became a ranger in the Smoky Mountains. Locals whispered stories, but I figured it was just superstition. Stay out of the deep woods when the fog rolls in, they'd say. It's easy to get lost, and once you're lost, you never find your way out. It was my 5th year on the job when I found out how true those stories were. The fog came in fast that evening. I was patrolling a remote section of the park, the kind of place few hikers ventured into. The sun had barely started to set when the mist swept through the trees like a living thing, swallowing the forest in a thick, impenetrable white. My radio crackled with static, cutting off any hope of calling in my location. I wasn't worried, at first. I knew the trails like the back of my hand, and I had my flashlight, compass, and years of experience. But the further I walked, the stranger things became. The forest grew eerily silent. No birds, no rustling of leaves, just the soft sound of my footsteps, muffled by the fog. That's when I heard it. A soft, distant laugh. I stopped, shining my light in the direction of the sound, but the fog was too thick. My heart skipped a beat. Hallucinations, I reminded myself. It was common in dense fog, especially when you're out here alone. Still, something about the laugh. It wasn't human. It echoed through the mist as if the fog itself was mocking me. I pushed forward, my compass swinging erratically in my hand. That's when I realized I wasn't on the trail anymore. My stomach twisted. I hadn't strayed far, but now, the trees all looked the same, shrouded in the mist. I tried to retrace my steps, but each turn seemed to bring me deeper into the fog. And then I heard the laugh again, closer this time. A shadow darted in the corner of my vision. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, just the mist. But I felt it. Something was watching me, following me. The fog seemed to thicken as night fell. My flashlight barely cut through it, and the air had grown cold, unnaturally so for this time of year. That's when I saw the first figure. A woman, standing just ahead of me, her back turned. Her clothes were old-fashioned, like something out of the 1800s. "Hey!" I called out, relief flooding through me. Maybe she was lost too. I started toward her, but she didn't move. "Ma'am, do you need help?" I was only a few feet away now, but something was wrong. Her body was still, too still, as if she wasn't breathing. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and my hand passed right through her. I stumbled back, heart racing. She dissolved into the fog like she was never there. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Stay calm," I told myself. "You're hallucinating. It's just the fog messing with your mind." But it wasn't just hallucinations. More figures began to appear. Men, women, children, all standing silently in the mist. Their faces were blurred, twisted by the fog. But their eyes, those hollow, dark eyes, followed me. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw it, the thing in the mist. It wasn't human, not even close. Tall, impossibly tall, with long skeletal limbs and a face that seemed to shift and distort with every second. It moved between the figures, gliding through the fog like it was part of it. And it was coming for me. Panic surged through me and I ran. My compass spun uselessly, my radio dead. The mist twisted the forest around me, turning every direction into an endless maze. I could feel the thing behind me closing in, its laughter mingling with the voices in the fog. My legs burned, my lungs screaming for air, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The figures watched as I stumbled past, their hollow eyes reflecting the terror I felt. Finally, I saw it, a break in the trees. I pushed through, falling to my knees as I burst out of the fog. The mist lingered at the edge of the woods as if it couldn't follow me any further. I staggered to my feet, heart still pounding in my chest. The figures were gone. The thing in the mist, whatever it was, had vanished. But the feeling of its eyes on me lingered, and I knew deep down that it was still watching. Waiting for the next time the fog rolled in. I don't patrol that part of the park anymore. None of us do. Because I know now, there's something in the mist. Something that doesn't want to be found. And once it sees you, it never forgets. The first time I saw the totems, I was on a routine patrol deep in the Pacific Northwest forest. It was a part of the park not many visitors ventured into, so I didn't expect to find anything unusual. But that day, as the light filtered through the thick canopy above, I saw them. 3 towering wooden totems, half buried in the earth, covered in moss and vines. I stopped in my tracks, confused. They weren't marked on any of the maps, and I'd never seen them before. I had no memory of any historical artifacts in this part of the forest, and yet here they stood, old and weathered but undeniably powerful. The carvings were intricate, animal faces, strange symbols, and human-like figures, their expressions twisted in what looked like pain. I radioed the Discovery in, but there was no response. Typical. The trees were too dense, and the signal was too weak. I took a few photos with my phone, planning to report it back at the station, but the longer I stared at the totems, the more uneasy I felt. It was like they were watching me. I walked closer, my boots sinking into the soft earth. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite place, something ancient. The carvings on the totems seemed to shift in the dim light, the faces almost alive. I reached out to touch one, running my fingers over the rough wood. That's when the wind changed. It swept through the trees in a sudden gust, carrying with it a low, guttural sound. It was not quite a growl, but it was not human either. I stepped back, my heart picking up speed. The forest, which had been eerily silent, now felt alive with unseen eyes. I could feel something watching me, just out of sight. I scanned the trees, but nothing moved. The wind had died down just as quickly as it came. But then I saw it. At the base of one of the totems, partially covered by moss, was a handprint. A human handprint, larger than any I'd ever seen, pressed deep into the wood. I took another step back, the unease growing into something darker. That's when I heard a voice. Not through the radio. This voice was all around me, as if the trees themselves were whispering. Leave. It was a single word, soft but filled with authority. My blood turned cold. I spun around, scanning the forest. But I was alone. Or at least I appeared to be. The totems seemed closer now, the air around them heavy with tension. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. Something was keeping me there, pulling me toward them. I stepped back, forcing myself to turn away, but then the ground trembled. A low rumble rose from beneath the earth, and the totems began to shake. Cracks splintered through the wood, and the faces carved into the totems twisted further, their expressions growing more grotesque. Suddenly, from the cracks, a thick, dark mist began to seep out, swirling around me. I backed up, tripping over roots and falling hard onto the forest floor. The mist coiled around the trees like living smoke, and within it, I saw a figure, tall, impossibly tall, its body obscured by shadows, but its eyes burning bright with rage. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. The figure moved toward me, its voice echoing in my mind. This land is sacred. You do not belong. I bolted, running through the forest as fast as I could, the ancient spirit's presence pressing down on me with every step. The trees seemed to shift, closing in, the path ahead twisting and turning in impossible ways. I ran until my lungs burned, branches clawing at my clothes and skin, the sound of the spirit's voice following me, growing louder with each passing second. Finally, I broke through the tree line and stumbled into a clearing. The mist stopped at the edge of the forest, the presence retreating as suddenly as it had come. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, my mind racing. The totems were nowhere to be seen, but I could still feel them, deep in the woods, watching, waiting. Back at the station, I told my supervisors about what I'd found. They laughed it off and said I'd probably stumbled across some forgotten tribal art. But when I showed them the photos on my phone, the totems weren't there, just an empty forest. I never went back to that part of the park again. I wasn't about to challenge whatever was guarding those woods. I had learned my lesson. Some things are meant to stay forgotten,